started drawing on the screen, and I was like, what's going on? So it was wonderful. All right, so again, I'm Eric. I'm not going to do a huge introduction because hopefully you're for pizza, honestly, but also maybe learn something about this library and these concepts of really trying to talk about messaging, event-driven things, event sourcing a little bit, and just what options there are out there. Obviously, this isn't really a pitch saying you should use this, but knowing alternatives, because really that's one of the strengths we all carry, or hopefully carry, having more options in our tool belt, being able to compare things, right, so on and so forth. Cool. Oh, I'm a trilogy there. Official title, I think now is like Team Lead of Application Development or something. App Dev. Not used to that.
Tech Lead, I think.
Tech Lead. I said something else. Great. All right, so I did say I have severe ADHD. So we have things like, hey, I'm Eric. Work at Trilogy. You know, we're good. Sweet. Awesome. For the most part, I don't mind if someone raises their hand. If something just really doesn't make sense where I start snoozing, that's cool. Otherwise, of course, Q&A at the end, or maybe there's good segments to ask questions. Some good links to have right away. There are two websites or domains for these libraries I'm going to talk about. Again, primarily the main one being Wolverine. It is wolverinefx.net. And there's my blog, which doesn't really get updated. Moving on. All right. So I'm going to talk about this library called Wolverine, but just to hopefully build confidence in the audience. This isn't something that just happened overnight. This is really the second take of this library. The original one was called Jasper. It's still out there. It's called archive status, I suppose. And that started like a decade ago. So this is not someone who said, hey, I have a new idea. I'm going to beat mediator and end-service bus and then in mass transit. I'll show them. This is literally just another option that's out there. And I will talk about how it actually has interoperability with those. So if you're familiar with those, or maybe some other frameworks for messaging, they play nice, which is great. I wish more libraries and frameworks were like that. Cool. There's the logo. I think it's very neat. Hopefully you do too. So what is it? Why am I pitching this? I said I wouldn't, but it is a command executor and a bus, and it's really a messaging framework. It's going to help you achieve messaging across different processes, different applications, different systems, whatever word is applicable for context. And if I mentioned Jeremy, that's the lead of the project. Obviously, best friends, first name basis. But he says this is I think he says grown-up framework. I mean, that's kind of a silly term. So really, it's designed for production. Again, this is take two of this effort, interoperability with other mature ones that are very popular. It's really meant for production. Like when you have a service that's going to potentially be bombarded, or needs to be robust, or have options, or be able to bring in a library like Poly, or have its own retry policies, right? It needs those things. And it also has things to help with testing. And what's kind of cool, we'll go into it, is unit style testing is pretty easy because of the conventions used. But it also makes integration testing not too bad. It has helpers for that. And I, for one, love when a library can help with that. That can be a challenge. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but this also isn't your typical, hey, I'm going to spin up a new instance of everything every time a command or message or query is received and blow up your memory. This actually does a little bit different using what we call now .NET source generation, and can wrap around your code. And it's pretty cool in that aspect. So yeah, low ceremony. It has some conventions, and in my experience with .NET, we have a lot of explicit configuration, which is great. But having come from the Spring Boot world maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where if anyone knows what I'm talking about, there's like just a bunch of annotations on top of a controller, and it looks a little scary. You know, what magic's going on here? It's not that bad, but I would say there's more conventions than I'm used to the .NET world. And hopefully I can show it's not too bad. And yeah, let's move on. Cool. Throw up some logos just in case anyone's familiar with these. There's mass transit, which doesn't really look great on that color, my bad. There's M-Service Bus by particular software, and then there's Meteor. Who here has used Meteor? No. Okay, I see more hands. Interesting. What about the other two, these libraries?
I think in high school with the guy does mass transit.
Oh, yeah.
Good buddy of mine.
Cool.
Growing up.
That's awesome. He seems very nice. I love like his webcasts he does talking about the product. Nice guy. Cool, that's awesome. All right. Well, if anyone's been to any of my other presentations, it's usually very high level and design and also try to be philosophical. So we're going to just dig into code right away. So definitely not my normal take. So let's dive in. See, I have a bunch of tabs ready, and I am good to go. And hopefully I'm fairly audible to anyone on Teams as well. I meant to check in earlier with that. Oh boy. All right, we have a few different projects. Really trying to take advantage of the RAM I installed on this laptop recently. Let's blow this up. All right. Okay. All right. Well, you can stay there. Windows 11. All right. I'd like to kind of just look at what I would consider a normal message or command handler for these types of things. It's pretty mediator-esque. I'm going to say meteor, I bet. But this is our long hand. Has anyone used the library Marten before I go any further? Okay. Okay. So at idempotent, spoiler alert, this is like a companion library we'll go into at the very end. But let's just pretend it's like a DB context, right, in a framework. There's a context, deals with data, cool. So we are going to inject those into this class, very cool. There's a handle method, literally called handle. We have a command coming in. We have our wonderful token. I left that there, nice. Well, Jeremy left that there, I'm using part of this code. We map all these, this data from the command to this entity, Ryan. We store it. In fact, we say, hey, let's get ready to save this to the database. It's a kind of unit of work type thing going on. And here we have these 2 lines of code that I'm particularly a little afraid of. And I wonder if anyone else has had similar experiences, because when you see this, at least when I see this, I'm thinking potential race condition. If one of these fails, or one happens before the other, depending on how you do it, obviously we have these ways here, but we may be causing some sort of race condition. Again, this is a simple example. I'm sure some of you are used to this idea of, I need things to go out in a particular order, I need them to work in that order, and if there's a failure, hopefully we've built everything to avoid that. So retry A, okay, now go to B, now go to C. But here, we're just queuing everything, being ready to go in the, ready to publish it, and then we're also going to save this request. Nothing too magical, but I just kind of want to call that out. Again, simple example, so it's maybe not too glaring. I'm going to uncomment this, as all good presenters do, I believe. And here is, it's pretty much the same thing, but it's done with some Wolverine conventions. We have this very cool transactional annotation on top of this method, and you hopefully aren't noticing too much, but there is method injection. For whatever reason, it was put in my head that method injection is evil. There's something, I think, when I started doing Java development with Spring, and then moving over to .NET a couple years later, just, ooh, it's spooky. It's not constructor injection. So I know when I first saw this, when Jeremy was talking about this Jasper 2.0, Jasper was 1.0, yeah, we mentioned that. I was like, oh, that's not something I'm used to, it's different. But here we're able to take in the command, we have this DB context type thing, and same thing, right? We map to this entity, we store it, and we're also going to return this event, because it's past tense. And for those that aren't familiar with event type conventions, event is something that's happened, right? It's factual, not disputable, no matter what Wikipedia may say. Ride has been requested. It has been done by the moon, so this isn't, I don't think I've probably allowed anyone, hopefully not too much, but let's go ahead and, why is this happening? I'm going to go ahead and use this command line from another open source tool from the guys who've done Marten and Wolverine. It's called Oten, hope I'm pronouncing it right, and it actually also hooks into Wolverine and allows a bunch of things. So you may notice a theme that a lot of the software over time has been refactored and split out to have different libraries. And we'll go over how Wolverine started for Marten. But for right now, what? Mystery.
Hey Eric,
Yeah.
can you make it bigger? I don't know, I mean, I have glare, it's maybe easier for these folks, but I would like it bigger.
Is that the?
That's better.
Why? I don't. Oh, there.
Yay.
We did it. We did it. It's like zoom all over again.
Did it fail successfully?
It failed successfully. Had to find a project to run. Very cool. Let's go ahead and go to the right one. Oh, you. Yeah. I want to go to ride share API. That's right. Oh. Oh. I'm a professional developer. I'm also a developer according to my license, but sometimes I doubt those things. All right. Oh, not again. All right. I'll move this I can. All right. That was challenging. Cool. So what happened? New files were created, and if we go to the ride sharing API, which is where I needed to be earlier, hopefully my laptop's hands are leading through to the online crowd. There's going to be this new folder called internal, and we've generated a bunch of new code. Effectively, we've created wrappers around what we already had. So let's dive into the request ride handler. It has this sweet integer right after it. It's going to look pretty similar. It's going to have the full namespaces, so there's a lot of text going on. Let's minimize that. Cool. So you can see we have this outbox session factory. We'll go over that in a moment. Here's our handle method. It does use a .NET convention that has async in. It's going to take in that message context and have our sweet cancellation token. But nothing too much, but you'll see that there was a message, an envelope message produced, right? We're casting it to request ride. So for those that are familiar with using envelopes and being able to establish things like a heading and whatnot, we have some of that happening automagically. We also have this outbox session factory, which is going to help us produce, help us use the outbox durable, stumbling on my words, the outbox pattern. So it's a durable persistence where we're just effectively saying, hey, there's this thing I need to do. There's this message. I need to persist it because if anything crashes or fails or what have you, and let's say we just have one instance of this deployed, when it comes back up, it'll crash. Oh, hey, Eric has this request that it's waiting still. I can go to that database table that I persisted it to. And I kind of skipped over some thoughts there, but you're basically persisting saying, hey, there is a request, and I need to get to it. So if our app does crash, they'll say, hey, go ahead and do that. Very cool. Effectively helps with distributed transactions. We'll kind of go into that a little bit later, more in detail. But that's what the outbox is. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and create that event, right? It's past tense, right? Requested, it happened. We're going to go ahead and queue this and get it saved, and we're done, effectively. Now there's a word I skipped over, cascading. I don't have a bunch of experience with mass trans, but I think they have something similar. They might call it something different. But it's the idea that your handler or whatever can produce or publish multiple messages, potentially. It's one to N. So let's say there's something that needs to happen besides the request. Because this is a ride-sharing app, which really, I don't think I said out loud, but we're pretending it's like an Uber or Lyft competitor. And maybe something else has to happen. And obviously it could cascade and go to service B, service C, and service. That could happen, but what we're doing here with this in-queue cascading async method, we could potentially load a bunch of events or messages here. Could be very useful. I'm trying to think of another example, but won't get stuck in that too much. But it's neat. So basically it's very similar to what we had. It just kind of adds in a few more things that we had configured. So in our program CS, you'll see some of the stuff I mentioned. There's this Octane extensions, just allows for more options. Again, it's another companion library of sorts. There's a driver locator, which we haven't dove into, but we're finding that neat. And you may notice that based off of the builder host, we're saying, hey, use Wolverine. So this isn't the typical iService collection, add X, add Y, add Z, pretending I'm Canadian for a second. But we're basically doing it at the host level. There's reasons for that. I don't think I'm really going to get into it in this talk, but there's documentation about it. And we're saying, hey, let's use Wolverine. Just use this assembly. You can be more specific if you want. This probably isn't applicable because I'm actually using a slightly older version of Wolverine. But in this application, we're using RabbitMQ. We didn't even mention RabbitMQ on the handler, right? Nothing there about it. We're doing auto provisioning. We're purging everything at startup, which is great for testing local development. Get everything out of there, out of the queues or whatever transportation you're using. Using conventional routing, so basically the naming is a standard of sorts. And yeah, we're saying, hey, we want to configure everything we're sending, the senders, and we want to use a durable outbox. There's no description there. I could get a commit on here. Add a little description for that. But basically, everything we're sending outwards is durable, it's persistent. And then when that request, that consumer consumes it, it's done. Great, it's off the list. So if there was anything that was failing or a fatal error that had happened, we can ensure that message or that request is going to happen. And those are not fun things to debug if anyone's been in that world where it's like you're digging through logs. Like I swear this should have sent over to the next ad or the next handler, but using something like a durable outbox is definitely nice to have. It seems like a lot of libraries don't have that out of the box. I think Mass Transit might be the example as service bus I have not used, because they like money. But yeah, if you've ever made your own like mediator type library, CQRS type library, your own, a lot of the time you're having to do that, build it yourself. At least that's been my experience. There might be other frameworks and libraries that make that easy. But it's nice that Wolverine does that. Yeah, explicit routing for publishing messages. So when this write accepted message is handled, it's going to go to this specific queue. So if you don't want to use conventions, or maybe there's some legacy, right, queue naming, some topic that you have to follow, great, you can do that. Don't want to spend too much time because configuration isn't that fun. I get it. But I just want to make sure we understand how everything is happening automatically, because I think that's sometimes a turn off for some developers where they really want everything to be explicitly listed. So when they inherit a new app or they're building something, they have full control. And I totally get that. But kind of moving on a little bit more quickly, perhaps, we're going to add Marten. Marten, I mentioned, is a companion library and how all this kind of started. In a nutshell, it's basically a library that interacts with Postgres. basically makes your Postgres database also not just relational, but something like Mongo or RavenDB or Dynamo. It leverages the JSON compatibility or functionality rather. But Postgres says, hey, great, now I have a document store. Sweet. And also because of what was happening with Jeremy, our good friend Jeremy, he needed to do event sourcing for his work. So he basically made it into an event store as well. So it's a document database, event store, library for .NET, and currently it's only really working with Postgres. So that doesn't mean Wolverine only works with Postgres. I want to make sure that's clear. In case anyone's like, oh, we don't use Postgres. You can configure this to use SQL Server. You can, instead of using Marten, which was like our our iDocument session that's coming from Marten. So if you didn't use Marten in a Postgres database, this could be a DB context. And use SQL Server or another database. So I just want to make sure that's clear. There are other options, but right now we're kind of marrying these two libraries. And honestly, I'm a big Postgres fanboy, so there, I said it. So it's nice. So blah, blah, blah. Here's our connection string. Here's our schema. And this is more related to event sourcing, but we're saying, hey, when it comes to the driver shift aggregate, be in process. And my goal is to kind of cap this conversation off with what the heck event sourcing is, just at a high level and how this can help with that. So you can see with this sweet Fluent API, there's integrated with Wolverine, awesome. And there's also event forwarding. This is, I think, introduced me a month or two ago, and this is something, just being up front, I wish we could demo a bit more in this session. Probably not going to get to it, but this is nice because it allows your applications to become event streaming services effectively. Who here is using or adjacent to Kafka? Man, okay, interesting. Interesting. I think I'm like, it's like a weird trend maybe. All right. But yeah, so if you want some sort of like event streaming app to just send out events, very granular ones if you want, like maybe you're doing IoT stuff, bits and bytes going around, or more transactional, you want to send it to all sorts of topics and consumers, you can do that too. We'll go into that at the very end. But yeah, there's some helper methods, add resources, make sure everything's spun up correctly. Oh, hey. We'll go over this a little bit later as well, but yeah, let's add open telemetry. Why not? Bada boom, let's do it. Let's give it a name. Let's have a export to Jaeger. Use the ASP.NET Core instrumentation, which went from net 5, net 6, and yeah, other configuration. But what's really powerful, and hopefully getting this across, is that we have this mediator thing, so we can send commands and queries in that application in process. Jeremy says in a lot of documentation. You can have it be asynchronous and maybe not be on the wiser, which is super powerful when you're trying to help junior developers. Because you know, certain messages, hey, oh yeah, that's asynchronous, it's going to go to another service. This should probably know that, but hopefully you get my point. You can have everything be logged and have the correct instrumentation using open telemetry, and do all these powerful things just through configuration and using the conventions. Because you'll see here that this is called handle. It does need to be called handle. It can also be called handle async or execute async. There's some other conventions, but this is something that I know I was almost turned off to when I saw this kind of stuff. What if I really want clear names? I'm a big advocate of naming and naming being done right. I know it's super hard. It's probably because I get fascinated with domain-driven design and you really focus on naming and adhering to the business concepts and variables and all those fun words. But here I'm like, well, you know what? If you have a good name for this class, because we are in C#, we're not doing some functional language. If you have a good name here, yeah, really it's just IO just saying, hey, here's the class, here's the function, great, done. And there's all this other stuff that's happening under the hood. Very powerful stuff. Yeah, spent a little bit more time on configuration than I wanted, but hopefully I didn't lose anyone. Cool. I just find that like, we probably go over all the auto magic that's happening, otherwise it's just gonna sound like witchcraft, which I think witchcraft's cool. But, don't tell my parents. Yeah, so it's just something that I personally have not seen in .NET a whole lot. You know, when I was in the Java world and doing a bit of Kotlin development as well, which is even more concise. What is? I have like 5 annotations on top of a class that's doing everything I wanted. That's kind of spooky. So it's just interesting how we prefer different things at different times in our lives. Not to get too philosophical. Let's hit the slideshow though. Right. Good job, Eric. My Russian's not very good, but you can see these are actually Ukrainian Russian dolls. And the middleware pattern and pipeline pattern in .NET seems to be really prevalent. It also creates some burden when it comes to performance. I'm not going to really dig into that here, and hopefully we can agree to some degree to that if you were to have tens of thousands of requests come in and you're constantly spinning up new objects, there's probably going to be, you know, some heavy memory usage going on. And Wolverine, one reason that is kind of it developed from Jasper in this new effort that Jeremy's doing. He wanted it to be performance minded because he's in a field where these pipelines are really useful. Hey, it's auto log everything I'm doing. Hey, put everything to open telemetry. Hey, auto retry this command or query that failed. Great, it is awesome. But there's a lot of performance woes once you're in a very busy system. And maybe the smart algorithm responses will refactor it. We've all been there. We know sometimes we just can't get around to that, and there's things that really can't be avoided. So Wolverine very much does leverage something that I think really Node and Express kind of popularized first. I got into .NET at 18, but it seemed like a lot of the Node and Express folks really like the middleware pattern. We could go on the generate around middleware, but it's a little boring, so I'm gonna keep plowing forward. I can definitely show you guys the GitHub URLs later if you want to pull it down and mess with it for sure. That's only fair. I think that's something all presenters should be doing. But yeah, durable inbox and outbox. Look at this guy. He's Wolverine. Very cute. So I poorly explained it earlier, and hope I didn't lose anyone. But by persisting these requests, either if they're incoming or outgoing, depending on your needs, you're ensuring things are atomically working, right? You have this unit of work structure, you're making sure everything is working as intended. Whether your systems are more choreography or orchestration based, you're able to work and ensure they're working the way you want. So ordering, I guess that's what I was trying to strive for there. Surviving process crashes. I'm just reading from the PowerPoint, very professional. And idempotency. I feel like every conversation about event-driven systems, you just have to say idempotency, and everyone goes, yes, idempotency, of course. My system does that. Big fancy word. But ensuring that you get a duplicate request, it's not going to trip up your system. That's the way I like to put it. Or you could just do the same request and complain. So I'm just thinking back to systems I've worked in where it's like, yep, there's the 6 requests in a row. It's the same thing. Oh God, what's happening? Not a fun experience to be. All right. We already went over kind of how you configure that, so kind of skipped ahead a little bit. External messaging, again, depending on how you have things configured, you can just automatically have it all be routed in a queue. But what's neat, and I haven't done it personally, I know Jeremy and Oscar's another contributor, have talked about it, but if you want one service to basically deal with routing in a queue, and let's say he's communicate with a more legacy service, or let's say newer, it's a newer service, and he uses SQS on Amazon, great. You can have Wolverine say, all right, this service uses that, this service uses this, and they can talk to each other, no problem. Granted, there's going to be some stuff you need to do. The project really hasn't gotten to the point where it's automatically done, but it's not a concern. I know that sometimes a question that's asked with these libraries is that complex to configure? If application A is using this transport, it gets a message on RabbitMQ and needs to send something off, and so it's not a big deal. Not a lot of code going on. Hopefully it becomes a one-liner eventually. I feel like that's the goal with Wolverine, is hopefully you can make it a one-liner. And yeah, there's some other ones that are currently being looked at. I can't really say me because I'm not a big contributor on the project, but the main maintainers like to say, we take pull requests when someone says, hey, have you added Pulsar or Kafka? I say, well, it's open source. So if you want to go ahead and do it, feel free, submit it. But those are the three big ones because those are where, those are the technologies, the transports that the main contributors are using. But one thing that's really neat is that there's like this blur, a good bad blur. Try to think of a joke about the band, I really liked it. But there's this blur between local queuing of commands and messages and external asynchronous ones. So in a way, this actually makes testing a bit easier because when you're crafting a unit or integration test, great, let's not actually spin up RabbitMQ, but let's pretend this in-process local queue is RabbitMQ. And all right, yeah, you're RabbitMQ for this test, great. And you can basically use local in-process, inline queuing just like you do asynchronous. So I think that's a big advantage. I don't think I explained that well, but the fact that they're treated the same according to Wolverine makes development a lot easier, especially when it comes to testing. So if you don't want to spin up a bunch of images or containers for tests, you can just say, hey, let's just, literally be a queue. Has anyone done that with tests, right? You don't have a real database, but you have a list of entities. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. All right. Same idea. You can see that there's been discussions about using a lightweight TCP transport, and some development's kind of started. Okay, well, whatever. Let's get back to the slides. All right, we'll go with code again, I swear. Here's an image. I'm trying to get a higher quality version, but maybe I need to do it myself on one of the Draw.io applications. Yeah, it's blurry. I cannot read the number and put it away from the screen. So you have your message brokers. Doesn't matter what you use, but you can have RabbitMQ, SQS, Azure Service Bus. You can have a Java application and Service Bus application, mass transit application, another Wolverine application. They're all going to communicate because of this interoperability that Wolverine's opted for. And I think that's probably need to clarify, but I feel like that's probably one of the main reasons that this project started as like a Jasper 2.0 is because of I want these features that other libraries don't have out of the box, and I could hopefully hack it to pieces and create these features layered on top, but it'd be really nice if they just played nice out of the box. And I feel like that's been Jeremy's drive for a lot of this. But you can see here that here's all these brokers, all these types of applications at the top, and then you have Wolverine application at the bottom here. There's listening agents, command handlers, sending agents. You can talk to SQL Server or Postgres. Those are the two big supported ones right now. And just to overload your context even more, I really want to make sure I throw a bunch of information at you to sound really impressive. There's another open source project from these guys called Weasel. You ever see a theme here with little critters? So Weasel actually is the one that does all these database operations under the hood of Wolverine Marten. I think I've got those names right. I'm trying to not trip up. Even the contributors are like, oh, I meant Wolverine, oh, I meant Marten, oh, I meant Weasel. Maybe we should do different names, guys. I don't know. I need to do that, redo that image. There's another Wolverine.
We built the project.
That makes my day. Yeah. Thanks for making this a safe space and trusting everyone. That's awesome. I want to show you the logo and you might go, oh.
I know, I remember it.
Ah, yeah.
That's why there's a weird cat thing.
Yeah, it does look like a cat. There's some air handling, and I'll show you some code just to show you it's real. But yeah, who here has used Poly, the library Poly? All right, we got one. All right, I know some of you are probably just not big fans. Popular library, really great. I recently, someone on my team, and our client, just brought it in for tests. And I don't know why, maybe this sounds really silly, but we just need to make sure we were connecting to this cockpit cluster. It's like, why don't we just ensure we keep trying to connect to it in our integration tests? Oh, you can use Poly in the testing library. Like, I guess, yeah, why not? There's no rule saying I can't use that in the testing library. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Yeah, if you need a retry immediately, retry in a bit, maybe you want a, I think they call it jittering in Poly, where let's try 50 milliseconds, 200,000, or whatever. Maybe you just want to discard it or throw it to a dead later queue, a DL queue, schedule it later, so at that specific time, just re-queue it, right? All sorts of things. So originally, there was an attempt to have Poly be used inside of Wolverine, but it's one of those, we have to adhere to their API, and it's mature, and lots of people use it, lots of companies use it, but just to ensure we can have it work the way we want, there's effectively another engine under the hood. So not Poly, but it effectively does everything that you would expect, I would say, for right now. We take pull requests. They take pull requests. You have something. We'll go over cloning going a little bit later. Let's actually show more code. Let's keep you guys engaged. Yeah, let's do that. All right, let's go to where we at. And if it's not legible, let me know. We are going to be in.
It could be bigger.
Could.
Yeah. And if you think it's big, I'll make it bigger.
I am usually the one who's like, has bad vision when his glasses don't get jacked. So we have an integration test here. It's for requesting rides. So it's at the API level, so to speak. And you can see here that there's some locations being initialized. And we're going to go ahead and invoke this command. Very cool. I love the naming of these helper methods. Invoke message and wait. Yeah, let's wait for it. Wonderful. Should have published, right? Should be a single message. That's actually something I really like because, again, not to go into the idempotent discussion again, but what if you got a second message? Like, would your test actually capture that? You got the first message with A, and your test passes, great, you dispose everything. But there's like another message behind it. Are you testing for that? How's your system, how's the product going to react to that, right? So I feel like having helper methods like that is great. This is stuff I honestly didn't think about when building one of the systems that I've worked with in the past. These are things that you find, oh, hey, we're getting more messages, there's duplicates, oh, there's something wrong. We weren't checking for that type of discussions. So anyways, that's, yeah, there's some helpers like I was mentioning. So just to show you that, hey, this code actually works. Listen, I don't know why, because works. Oh, right. Let's go ahead and spin up RabbitMQ, Jaeger, and a Postgres container. And then you should open fast. Or is there a aha. Lately, I've been doing a lot of integration tests where each project has their own compose, or each test has their own compose sometimes. Man, that is not fun. Cool. That third one isn't going to work. We're just going to pretend it's not there. But having these things built into the library, not having to pull down additional libraries, Wolverine.test.helpers, like there's a time and a place for having additional libraries to do additional functionality, but the fact that if you pull down Wolverine to help with messaging and commands in your application, hopefully when you test them, they have what you need to prove it works, right? Mathematicians like proofs, I heard, so you get the idea. Is this the one that failed? No, I think it passed. I don't want to harp on the one that failed. There's a gotcha, but we won't go over it. Oh, it's because there's two messages, or two processes, and we're saying requests are write within one process, and it's basically going to two, and that's why it is failing, I believe. Okay. All right, let's continue before I embarrass myself even more, right? So one idea with Wolverine, and this is just one of those things that's like, yeah, isn't this always the case? Is that it's a library that when you're using it, and it's your main driver, it's your main framework of sorts, hopefully you can just clone that repo and it works. Who here has only worked in that kind of environment where you can clone it and it just works? Everything you ever do just clones and works, right? Yeah, right. What that does. But that's the idea, is that because this has a lot of helper methods, it has things to ensure things are durable, things are set up, your queues and topics are purged at startup, things like that. Or you can actually generate code and see what the heck's happening. It's meant to be able to help with that clone and go design. So even if it's not truly able to happen where you can just pull down a repository and it works, hopefully it has enough indicators to help you out. One thing I think no, we didn't run it, did we? So if I were to do, going off script, watch out, here we go. If we just build this, I think what's going to happen, we might see it here. Oh, did I hit build? So I want to say, I have, again, a couple different solutions up. So I might be thinking of the wrong one. I am. All right. That's embarrassing. But it can show all the SQL that's happening at the beginning. And for me, working with event-driven and event sourcing systems, and basically wiping that slate clean every time I reboot it, I want to see your events executed. Create a new table, create a new database, create a new whatever that has stored procedures, set this queue up, set this topic up. I want to see that. I just want it in this log. And it looks very busy and it looks very cool. Ooh, look at me, I'm a developer. Look at all this text happening when I launch an application. But it's very helpful when you're trying to debug and have that assurance. So if we went to, I'm not going to show this off too much. That's with my stretch goal, so to speak. E-commerce application to kind of show the capabilities. But if I were to launch, I think, products. Let's see if I embarrass myself real quick. Actually, I think it's going to fail because I don't have the right container stuff. Yeah. Exporting telemetry metrics, yeah. But yeah, you get the point that it's going to have a lot of information on what's happening. Yeah, moving on. Hopefully that makes sense for having these helpers and having all this set up to help you out and clone it. Hopefully that makes sense. Logging and instrumentation. So we kind of talked about this. Who here is using open telemetry or another spec that's similar to that? Guys, we messed
No
Yes,
one's
thank you.
doing any tools.
Paperwork.
It's great. It's wonderful. I love that ASP.NET's like kind of accepted that and made it a bit easier to use. So Wolverine just kind of went on that train. Trying to think of an example we can go over. So I kind of want to talk about my particular interest in this with past experiences. I keep mentioning event sourcing, probably sounds mystical, not my intent. But in a prior life, we built a system that does event sourcing. Who here is familiar with that paradigm or technique? Okay, cool. Yes, people nodded. So in a nutshell, hopefully I can describe this well after what, 5 to 6 years. You record all state changes. Hooray, I did it. So anything that happens, let's say your ride entity has its, what do we call it, ending location, pickup location changed. The person who's ordering this ride on Lyft or Uber knockoff says, oh, I'm actually going to be down the street. I want to get a shot real quick or go to that bar. You can pick me up there, right? So you can change that. And in a typical traditional relational database, I always like to picture it as like an Excel spreadsheet. You know, go to that cell, right, change GPS locations, and now that data is of the prior location. That might not be important for that application, but in other use cases, perhaps you're trying to look at GPS coordinates to kind of map movement. Maybe you're trying to have some sort of audit log in your system to know who is changing what and when, because you work in finance or insurance. I know a lot of folks who talk about event sourcing and work in like the mortgage space. You can bet everything's recorded there. Every single change is recorded. You aren't going to a table. Again, I'm really just kind of picturing a relational database, but we aren't changing a value and then no one knows about it, the prior one. It might not matter. I'm not saying relational databases are bad by any means. It's just the idea that if change is important or you would want a historical log, event sourcing is recording everything, like an account ledger, right? Checks and debits and credits. I took 3 accounting classes in college, believe it or not. But having all those checks and debits in a ledger of sorts shows what was done when and how. And if you accidentally receive money from the bank because someone fat fingered your account number, it's not like the bank's going to pull out an eraser and go, ooh, didn't happen. No, they're going to do the opposite and mark it, right? That reimbursement. So that's event sourcing in a nutshell. Did I lose anyone with that mediocre explanation? Cool. I do better expert. I tell my parents. So CQRS is a type of architecture style. Some people say it's not really architecture, but I'm not going to get into that. Who's familiar was heard of command and query responsibility segregation? Cool. So a few more heads. All right, now we're cooking. Here we go. So CQRS really lends itself well to event sourcing. Because in event sourcing, you're either saying, hey, tell me this thing, you're querying what happened, or what happened in the past, perhaps. Or you're mutating, you're changing, you're commanding something. So if you think about it, a message is kind of at the top of this hierarchy. Message comes in. It could be an event saying, hey, something happened. It could be a command, do something. Hasn't happened yet. It could be a query, tell me something. But CQRS had whole other topics just on that. But it lends itself well to event sourcing and really distributed systems that need to be really robust and work well together. You need to make sure A, B, C, and D happen in that order, no matter what, and if there's failures, you need to ensure to keep trying or tell someone, right, about it. And that type of architecture really lends itself well. I'm not going to go over all these like super in depth. I just really want to make sure we kind of hit those two in particular. The decider pattern is something that really I feel like is just another name for a pipeline. There's some really good talks I found on YouTube about getting rid of very big models inside our applications. Sometimes we call them aggregates to sound fancy. That's kind of the jab at the DVD community, which I find myself part of, so I'm kind of poking at myself. But the decider pattern basically says, hey, I am now going to contain all the business logic. The model really is just the bare bones. The decider pattern is going to say, hey, I got, let's pick on other letters. Let's say I got X. We're over using A, B, and C. I got X. I need to either go to Y or Z, or maybe I need to do both. And that's when we have that conversation of cascading messages, where you need to perhaps do multiple things as a result of the state of what's happening inside that handler. So that is a very attempt at this describing the decider pattern. I find myself using it more and more instead of very large models. Domain models is another term. Ensure a certain state of quality or everything's working as intended. Because there's pros and cons, but I find myself leaning towards the decider pattern because really, hopefully I'm getting my point across here. I can start having most of my logic and decisions in these little, I'm going to call it a function. I know it's not a function, it's a method, but hopefully you get the point that we're in a static class, static method. Really, this is just a giant function. Do this thing. This really is a business process. This is a step in that giant workflow. So as we start to get to the concept of distributed workflows, which is kind of what I'm building up to. That's my goal. We'll see if I do it. We're able to go, oh, we're going to handler A, B, C, D, E, and oh, it went this way, it went that way. But everything's super clear. We evaluate state, we evaluate commands, and we're able to make a decision. And again, depending on what you've worked on in the past, sometimes code logic is really hard to follow. Oh, there's just ifs. There's just if statements. Can't be that bad. F those F statements. F those ifs. Yeah, so when things are very clear, concise like this, I find testing to be incredibly simple. So we kind of went over the integration test. We saw a lot of helpers from the Wolverine library are there. If I went to usages, now I'm thinking of another project, all right? I'm ensuring I embarrass myself every 3 minutes. That's kind of my quote right now. But you can imagine that testing this is pretty simple. Does anyone think there would be any complexities here? Like, okay, I got this object, and here's this context. I'm mapping, storing it, and I return something. Not too bad, right? Great. So if you're in an environment where you need like 98% test coverage because someone made that decision and left the company, I'm not going to run it. Great, I can fulfill that now. It's going to be pretty easy to hit that 98% goal. And hopefully that meaningful behavior-driven integration tests too that sometimes don't really add to coverage, but you're testing actually what the business needs, right? All right, a little bit of SAS there. Okay. Also, like I mentioned, outbox support, inbox, event subscriptions, which is a bit newer part right now. Marten, let me get the names wrong up. Marten is in release candidate 1 or 2 for 6.0. We used 3.0 on that old project. So it's really chunky. They now have event subscriptions to make an event streaming type of service. And just to really connect the dots, if we picture all those ride services, driver updates, saving every state change, we now are effectively creating streams of data. I'm trying to do my hands to be entertaining, but you get the idea that all these little state changes are little statement letter statements, and they're being streamed out, and whoever wants to listen to it can. So now you can create handlers based on state mutations. So if there is a kind of want to rag on the banks. So let's say there is a NSF, non-sufficient funds event. Don't like this. Don't like it. Those are my least favorite events in the world. When that is saved, because you're using an event sourcing system instead of a relational table, where you make something like, instead of a balance of $10, now there's -5. There's an event, and the event says account ID is, amount was this, here's the new balance, right? When that event is now persisted, you now are streaming that event, and any consumers who are interested in that, like a notification system, can listen to it. So you have a handler, hopefully pretty simple. You have a handler for that event, and it can send off an SMS, or we don't call it SMS in the States, do it. Sends off a text message, can send off an email, maybe does both, all because you're listening to this event subscription because you have an event source system. See how these things are kind of coming together? So this stuff is what they call the critter stack. They're kind of voting on it right now. Critter pack sounds pretty cool too, but everyone says stack when it comes to things. But I'm like, critter pack just kind of stinks, damn. That's the most important thing I can tell you today, is the naming decision. Also, concurrency projections, kind of going over where I thought it would be in terms of time, but point being is that if you're creating remodels for multiple applications, or maybe replicas of applications, having something like the critter stack and having all these helpers and ensuring things are persisting, being fulfilled, state changes are happening or not happening, and reacting accordingly. Because again, when I talked about A could be, where X could become Y or Z, you can have whole reactions based on that, cascading effects based on what needs to happen for the business. And we can ensure a good eventual, I'm going to word that poorly. We can ensure there's eventual consistency, but it's working as intended. Because whether we like it or not, there's nothing that's perfectly consistent. There's always a delay, right? There's always a delay. We can say, hey, my MySQL database is atomic, and blah, 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 but like really, you know some of these operations are taking 5 nanoseconds. Theoretically, something could happen within those 5 nanoseconds. Okay, but when you have things that maybe take, especially with all the AI stuff going on, yeah, I created an event, I set it off, I need some work to be done by ChatGPT, whatever. It's going to take a minute or 2 or 10. And I just need to make sure that everything's acting accordingly when I get that back. Did that process keep going, even though it should have waited, right? Yeah, so that's the Marten logo. Again, it looks more like a cat. I want to show a little bit of code to kind of wrap everything up and at that point. So let's go. Yeah, let's do this. So this is an okay example. It's all right. Kind of wanted to modify it before I got here, but changing stuff before you present's never a good idea. So here is our driver status. Again, going back to this ride-sharing app. This is effectively the state. The driver is either ready, assigned, or unavailable. There's different events. You can tell they're events because they're past tense. Shift started, driver ready, right, accepted, right. Who here is using records, by the way? They're currently day-to-day C# development. I love records. All right. You can see driver shift. This is actually, we're not using like a base. Oh, there's still stuff right now. Nice. We're not using like a base class, but this is effectively a domain model. It is an aggregate. So it has this identifier. There's a version which we'll cover in a second. And you can see here is a constructor that takes events. And effectively that constructor is going to assign these properties, these values. And yeah, nothing too magical, but there are these apply methods at the bottom. And effectively these are behaviors of this domain model saying, hey, when I get this driver ready event, and in this case, this is a state change. It's kind of interchangeable. When I get this state change, I need to update the status and the location. Because again, these are facts, right? They're past tense, and they are indisputable. So you're not going to see any throw exceptions or anything like that in apply methods. I have seen them, and I get very triggered. You can't dispute what just happened. Why are we throwing an exception on something that has happened already?
I think you said the validation should always happen before.
Well, yes.
the event's created.
This guy should present that. He has good keynotes. I've seen them. But really, you're doing state changes from this object that we call an event or a state change. Cool. Nothing too magical. Pretty you know, C# 101, so to speak. But the point being is that we have this handler, and this is hopefully where things kind of merge. I wanted to make a more complex example, but probably would have bit off more than I can chew. We have this annotation called the Marten command workflow. It's now different if you use the latest version of Wolverine, released like Monday. So if you upgrade this code repo and say Eric's a liar, it's deprecated. Obsolete rather, sorry. But this is our handler. It accepts a command. Wolverine's automatically going to retrieve this from the database. This is something I wish we had a few years ago, is that, hey, I'm going to work with this aggregate, this model. And when we pass, well, that's a command, sorry. I hit my 3-minute app and there's my self-point. But hey, I'm going to take this command and there's an ID property of some kind in it. There we go. And it's smart enough to know that the first quid or int or string that has a similar name or has ID in it, there's a variety of conventions. Again, conventions are spooky, but they're pretty great to make short code. If there is an identifier here, and there's also a parameter, what is that? There's also a parameter. Don't do this to me. Don't do. Okay. I'm glad it knows the last file I opened. If there is something that looks like an aggregate identifier, I want you to go ahead and query for that aggregate. And what's really cool, if you're familiar with event sourcing, which the whole room is, I think, in our poll, right? Is that this could be going to a read-only projection of that aggregate that was done a day or a week or whatever ago from the last state change. Or we could configure to say, even though there is no state changes, I want you to pull query everything and recalculate those values. I want you to do all these applies again. And just make sure we absolutely, no DBA went in there and changed the so-called immutable ledger. Bad humor there. But the idea is that those events can't change, right? You can't go in there and change it. So we don't have a query. We don't have any checks. We're not saying, hey, are you in the correct state? Everything is just automatically done. I find this as someone who worked in an event sourcing system for a few years. I've built a couple now. This is super nice. It really cuts down a lot of code. And if you want, because we're using method injection, very spooky, it's not constructor injection, you can just keep adding other things. Like, hey, I want to do potentially a database query. We could pretend this is a DB context for entity framework users out there. So let's just pretend to call it DB context. All right, so if something is unavailable, if the Decoupled model is aggregated, oh, why is it here? Well, as you no, teams, we were working so well together. Should I do stop sharing and reshare maybe? Okay. Let's work about that. I feel like we're getting to the capstone of everything. Come on. Okay. So let's say there's this state and here it's unavailable. Maybe I need to query something. I need to do a follow-up operation, right? Maybe this should be in a different handler or application or whatever, but for example's sake, we could, we could query stuff here now, right? All because I decided to add that extra argument at the very top. Because this is effectively, the way I perceive it, this is a business function. This is a business process. It is supposed to be a very short, concise, hopefully legible thing that says, oh, this is what happens when I get this command query event. I need to do these things. Oh, this states this. It's unavailable. Okay, get out of there. Break. Oh, if it is not unavailable, go ahead and return a write accepted. Because the driver clearly, try to figure out how to word that. If they're not unavailable, hopefully they're picking it up, right? This is our little Uber Lyft knockoff. There's probably more logic in your actual apps, right? But yeah, we can return this. And what's really neat, and maybe a little scary is that the method signature is an enumerable object. I'm trying to accept this. I know it's different. It reminds me maybe a bit too much of JavaScript and Python and stuff. I like my types, I really do. But by having this, you don't have to. You can obviously break up your handlers or business functions in other ways if you want. You're the developer. But here, we can return or yield multiple things. So if multiple things need to be broadcasted, recorded, whatever, because maybe you want to, I'm trying to remember if this works in this version of Wolverine or if it's VR right now. But if you want to return things that aren't events, I'm probably going to eat my words here. I want to say they're looking at that, not me. They're looking at that, but right now it's only events, I believe. But the idea is that potentially you could say, hey, I need to do this command, I need to do this query, and I need here's these events. So if anyone's listening, great. You can do all that from here. So that spooky, enumerable object could be pretty powerful. So hopefully that kind of weaves together some of these ideas I'm rambling about. There's this framework library. I like to say library, but it's really probably a framework for messaging, for distributed different processes, or if you just want to treat it like a mediator and have everything be in process in one application, you can do that too. It's companion applications that really, for the reason that you started, that deal with transforming your Postgres database into something more NoSQL. If you want to do event sourcing, record every single thing, which definitely takes a bit of code and takes a while to get your head around. But you want to broadcast potentially anything for audit reasons or so people can make decisions. Your adjacent teams can react to whatever you're doing. Very powerful. There's those libraries. There's libraries that we kind of saw at the very beginning. If you want more command line options, there's some command line options of, hey, I want to purge these queues or purge a specific queue or do other things or recreate all my read models. If you want to do it from the command line, great, cool, you can do that. So there's all these libraries that the Jasper FX cruise. I swear I was going to end this on a cool note, but maybe Jasper. Yeah. So this team, it's small. There's multiple projects that all kind of weave into each other. I don't think there's a whole lot of dependency hell going on. They've done a really good job of making sure if you don't want one of these, you don't need to, if possible. There's AWS as of Monday or last week, I forget, started sponsoring it. So they're giving them like $1,000 plus every month now. There's this guy named Eric Shaker that's sponsoring them. Good job. Good job supporting your open source people. Because honestly, these guys make my job easier. Or at least jobs where I'm really using these libraries. I love them for personal projects. I love them for production. This crew's great. And I'm trying to think of a good way to end everything, but that's it. So if there's any questions, let's go. Cool. All right, appreciate everyone's time.